Alright, hello everyone, and thank you for tuning in once again to the Black Box Podcast. BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. On this channel, we've talked a lot about the Zodiac Killer, and I did one upload about Gareth Penn and Michael Ohare, a researcher and kind of one of the suspects that you would say in the whole mystery. And I was listening to that one recently, and there were some major problems with the audio. I'm still going to leave it up. It's called Zodiac Killer, Gareth Penn and Michael O'Hare. I'm going to leave the original recording up, but I thought I would really want to just record some stuff, and hopefully the audio will come out a little bit better this time around. Well, what can we really say about this whole issue? It's been a while since we've talked about the Zodiac, and I think this is kind of a really good way to get back into the mix. Gareth Penn is kind of in an interesting place because not only is he a researcher in the case, by doing so, he also became a suspect himself. And there's even a great kind of like little YouTube segment where they're like, is Gareth Penn the Zodiac Killer? And I say great only because of just the way that it's presented. It's not gonna like change your entire perspective on the Zodiac case if you're listening to the YouTube clip, but just the way that they introduce the subject. I mean, like, everything is completely conveyed in like a 3-minute segment, and you understand everything that they're trying to say. Basically, there's trying to sort of match up some sort of things associated with knowledge and the description of the Zodiac's voice and the kind of motivations to come forward. I said, though, on the original recording, that it wouldn't surprise me at all if someone like the Zodiac Killer would have come out in the 1980s as some type of person pretending to be a researcher into the Zodiac case. I mean, in fact, based on what we've heard of the Zodiac, that does seem like something he would do, like almost a confession in plain sight, but at the same time not completely giving away his identity. And the way that Gareth Penn breaks down some of the explanations, such as, oh, well, I think the Zodiac means this, I think the Zodiac means that. What really is the heart of the Gareth Penn theory? Well, to recap, it really revolves around a single word, and that would be radian. A radian is 57.3 degrees of an angle. And when I was looking at some other stuff about like the math blogs and such, some people were writing that it's actually kind of like a decimal that goes on a bit longer. Something like 57.294 degrees of an angle. And what Gareth Penn was saying was that 99% of the population, the English-speaking population that is, would not be using the word radian in their vocabulary, yet it appears in one of the Zodiac letters. Specifically, put a radian on top of Mount Diablo on a map of the Bay Area, and the lines are going to kind of draw out to Zodiac sites of Zodiac activity, as well as completing the Zodiac symbol. And then that's kind of the heart of the Gareth Penn theory, that the Zodiac symbol was chosen for a very specific reason, that the radians will line up and sort of complete this kind of circle with a cross in its shape, and that there will be, this is all going to line up mathematically. This is all going to line up with angles. And that's one of the reasons why Gareth Penn chose his suspect Michael Ohare, who he believes is a brilliant lecturer, who he believes, had the kind of knowledge and the ability to do this. He had the ability to kind of come up with this sort of radian theory that would, in short, tie in to all the Zodiac murders. But what is the likelihood of this happening? I mean, the kind of absolute elephant in the room that we have to address that we mentioned last time was people accuse Gareth Penn of fudging the numbers. They're like, he is not exactly able to do this radian thing as perfectly as he says he can. And not to mention that there are a variety of things like that do not add up. Such, for example, Blue Rock Springs. That is one of the locations that we have Zodiac activity at, but there are numerous places named Blue Rock Springs. And if you're going to use Gareth Penn's radian theory, the line actually goes to Blue Rock Springs Golf Course, where there wasn't an incident of Zodiac activity. It should have gone to Blue Rock Springs Park. That brings us to the next point on Gareth Penn's theory about bodies of water. Blue Rock Springs, Lake Berryessa, Lake Herman Road. These are all kind of very loosely connected to bodies of water, and they're even saying that Paul Stine, the taxi driver, was killed on Washington and Cherry Street, and there was a fire hydrant very closely nearby to where the taxi driver, Paul Stine, was murdered. At first, I would say that it's kind of a good explanation about why Paul Stine was murdered, as opposed to other victims, which were Lover's Lane incidents. They were couples, and Paul Stine is just an individual driving a taxi cab. He is not with a woman. Very, very different than that of the other incidents. But what we can say is that this is also seems to be somewhat of a pattern of serial killers. In the Texarkana Moonlight murders, there definitely does seem to be a bit of deviation with these types of killings. Like the final victims can often, like at least in the case of the Texarkana Moonlight murders, the final victims were targeted differently than the previous victims. They weren't targeted at a lover's lane. They were two people in their house listening to a radio program, whereas Paul Stine's just driving his taxi. But he needed someone to drive to a very specific location to complete this radian theory, to get these angles to line up. That's Gareth Penn's theory. So he tells them to drive to Washington and Cherry Street so that all of this would work mathematically. That location was chosen very specifically, according to Gareth Penn. My immediate blowback was, it is an enormous stretch to say that Washington is a body of water because the first letters are W-A-S-H. I couldn't believe that when I heard it. That, like, you're trying to refer to wash as a body of water because, or just that it's water related, W-A-S-H. And it's like, even the fact that you see a fire hydrant nearby or something, apparently there was a fire hydrant very close to where Paul Stine was murdered. That's your water source. That is a huge stretch. And we've already said that Gareth Penn has been accused of fudging the numbers, that he has been accused of trying to force this theory, and that his angles and his mathematics really just do not work out as well as he says they do. And we'll talk about the water in a little bit, but I think we just have to recognize that it seems like Gareth Penn composed some very interesting things about the Zodiac Killer, and it almost fits in a neat little package, except there's a little bit of a possibility, or not a little bit, there's a very large possibility that this stuff is just not lining up, and that it would be really great if we could just use this narrative and be like, well, that's exactly it. Gareth Penn is the Zodiac Killer. Forget Michael Ohare. Gareth Penn is the Zodiac Killer. He just told us how it all worked. This is the Zodiac Killer's plain sight confession. And, if the Zodiac did live till the 1980s, that does sound like something that I believe the Zodiac would do. He's all about taunting. So many of the letters are taunting people, taunting the police. That's what the Zodiac was all about doing. Someone who's sort of like, I'm smarter than you, I can manipulate the system, I committed these murders and got away with it, now I'm going to confess in a book-length form, now I'm going to confess on national television, and I'm never going to get caught. That's what I kind of think about when I kind of looked into this stuff initially about Gareth Penn. I mentioned in the previous upload that I did read segments of his book, Time 17, which was posted, someone posted an electronic copy of it back in 2011. And it's like, it was over my head at the time, dealing with lots of things about, once again, radians, angles, math, binary, and the linking them with bodies of water and stuff, and I was just like, whoa, I didn't know what to make of it, because it was just, it's definitely more complicated than a lot of the other theories. If you're going to look at somebody like Arthur Lee Allen, the short story with Arthur Lee Allen is he was an asshole. It's like, and also he was just a very, very problematic individual, pedophile even. But when it comes to somebody like Michael Ohare as a suspect, that, this very, very complicated theory. Gareth Penn as a suspect, very, very complicated theory. There's another part of the Gareth Penn theory, though, that we didn't really get to talk about much in the previous upload. And a lot of people think that Gareth Penn's particular voice matches the descriptions of the voice that people are talking about, like the people who have heard the Zodiac killer on the telephone, are describing a voice that sounds a lot like Gareth Penn. Monotone, someone who has an abnormal speaking cadence, not an accent, but just a very bizarre way of talking, almost like the words are forced out. And I do confess that Gareth Penn has a very abnormal way of talking, and I have one thing to say, and this is going to sound kind of weird, but I noticed on Wikipedia that Gareth Penn is a German linguist. That's one of the things that he does that doesn't really get talked about much because it's not super relevant to the Zodiac case. And, like, he definitely does have a monotone voice. And I used to study the German language, and one of my German tutors advised me that if you want to talk in German, you do it in a monotone way. And I know we have a few listeners in Germany and Europe and that part of the world. And that was just something that a German tutor once advised me to talk in a monotone when you're speaking the German language. And maybe that's affected Gareth Penn's English in some way, about why he talks in that monotone way. He does have an abnormal speaking cadence for American English, that is. I mean, I don't remember much German anyway myself, but it's like, I don't really know if there's a connection there. I'm just throwing it out there. Somebody told me that once, and that could be an explanation about why Gareth Penn has that abnormal speaking cadence. Does that necessarily mean that he talks exactly the way the Zodiac does? Does that mean that just because Gareth Penn has a monotone voice that the Zodiac would have talked in the exact same way? Well, what I can say is that even in the video, Is Gareth Penn the Zodiac Killer? It's like, one guy is saying that he could very clearly identify the Zodiac's voice if he heard it again, but we have countless recordings of Gareth Penn. I mean, he's been featured in numerous things, especially the TLC presentation on this. That guy apparently doesn't seem to, has not remarked that he has heard Gareth Penn's voice there, but when they did the Zodiac reenactments, you definitely do hear something, and you hear that sounds like someone who's almost mocking the police department. Like, there's a very abnormal way when you hear words like, goodbye. Excuse me for that horrendous reenactment right there, but it's almost just like arrogance, mocking, I murdered people and I'm not going to get caught. That's what I got when I heard these reenactments that they were posting about in this little video on YouTube. But what I would say is that the likelihood of Gareth Penn being the Zodiac Killer is, I think it's rather low. I think that it is an enormous stretch to tie in these things with the bodies of water when you're going to refer to a fire hydrant as a water source even. I mean, is that really what the Zodiac was doing? He got in Paul Stein's taxi and said, hey, drive me to Washington and Cherry Street because people wash things with water. I'm going to wait till I see a fire hydrant and I'm going to shoot him in the head. That's the theory? Goodness gracious. I mean, that just sounds... There's like a 0.001% chance that could have validity. I mean, that's just a bit too much for me to accept. But one of the things that I was hoping to explore when we get back more into some of the Zodiac uploads is something that comes to us from Tom Voigt, actually, when he mentioned a suspect named Watterson. Watterson is kind of like a moniker. It's like a sort of pseudonym. Remember we did George Russell Tucker on this channel? That's not his real name. It's just kind of a name that has been attributed to him because they don't want to, deal with things that are affecting the family and such like that. And I don't even know the specifics about this suspect Watterson, but I want to investigate a little bit more. And I think that that's where it's going to be going, that they're going to try the bodies of water theory again, and they're going to be like, well, look at all these things, Blue Rock Springs, Lake Berryessa, Lake Herman Road. All right, he's trying to give us a clue. The water is a clue, and his name is going to be something like Watterson, Waterton, Waters even. He could have a name like that. I want to kind of investigate that more, but you might have a stronger case if you didn't have the Paul Stein murder, and which took place on Washington and Cherry Street near a fire hydrant. I mean, I think that this is probably going to be a wild goose chase in somewhat, but I do want to know more about it all the same. That's one of the reasons why we do these kind of podcast uploads, because it's just kind of exploring what people are saying about the Zodiac Killer, as well as various other true crime cases. I'm going to keep going with the Texarkana Moonlight Murders. That's another one that I've been quite pulled into, and I can definitely see why people are involved with both cases. And my own personal hypothesis with the whole thing is that the Zodiac Killer actually studied the Texarkana Moonlight Murders, the Phantom Killer, which was back in 1946, and of course the first Zodiac killing was in December of 1968. So I really got the feeling that the Zodiac was like, all right, what can I do with this as a model? Let's look at these 5 murders in 1946. How can I improve upon them? Or maybe improve isn't that's too glamorous of a word. How can I do better? I can become a better legend than this. I can become a more badass serial killer than this. Undeniable similarities between the Moonlight Murders and the Zodiac Killer. I mean, the hood, targeting lovers' lanes. I mean, even, using the firearms. Granted, the Moonlight Murders involve a kind of some more bizarre elements that we can talk about once we get back to those particular uploads. But what we also have from the Zodiac that we did not get from the Phantom Killer is the cipher. The ciphers, I should say. The letters. The taunting of the police. All of those things. So that's where I was just well, the Zodiac might have studied that case and been I can become way more legendary than this guy. I can really kind of just blow this guy out of the water. Nice expression for talking about today. But, I think it could be a great narrative, if only if it were true, that Gareth Penn was the Zodiac Killer, that Michael Ohare was even the Zodiac Killer, where it was just especially Gareth Penn, though, in the sense that you committed the murders in 1968 and 1969, kind of sat quiet for a little bit, and then confessed in his own way years later, never getting caught, but still telling everybody exactly how it was done, putting the radian on top of Mount Diablo. And if 99% of the population is unfamiliar with radian as a common word in their vocabulary, the Zodiac Killer could have been laughing at them years ago and just been they're overlooking the most important thing. This is how you solve the case. I mean, it's not necessarily how it happened. I'm just sort of entertaining a hypothetical with that, okay? I'm just kind of talking about that because I think that would be a really, really solid narrative. Except for the fact that the math doesn't seem to work out. Except for the fact that it's an enormous stretch of the truth with this Paul Stein murder. And the other thing that we just have to recognize is, it's really not gaining a lot of other support. Why are more people examining this and kind of coming to that same conclusion? It's kind of just getting into that sort of way that we described the Lyndon Lafferty case, where only working in your own little bubble, it only works if you follow Gareth Penn's directions. It only works if Gareth Penn is telling the story. Because we have so many other people confessing, and we have so many other people claiming that they've solved the case. Multiple people have said that they've cracked the case, and it's Richard Gaikowski. Multiple people have said they cracked the case, and it was Arthur Lee Allen. And we've had an enormous amount of people writing me and telling me that it's Lawrence Kane. So people feel very certain that they've solved the thing, that they solved this whole thing. And I really would say that a lot of people do not have an overwhelming connection to Gareth Penn. A lot of people do not have this overwhelming connection to Michael Ohare. But I do have to have one concluding note. Gareth Penn's theory revolves around that because the person is writing about radians, they must be an academic, they must be a scholar. We said some of this last time. Not necessarily. This could just be somebody who picked up a book and learned what a radian was. This could be somebody who was told by a mathematician what a radian was. This could be somebody who was in a high school math class, heard his math teacher talking about radians, and remembered it. You don't have to be a scholar to be talking about these things. You don't have to be some sort of Ivy League lecturer to be talking about these subjects. So I always want to bring up that point when we're going to be dealing with Gareth Penn and Michael Ohare and these sort of theories. Once again, I think it's an interesting theory. I think it's kind of a, it's even more than interesting. It's a fascinating theory to discuss this Gareth Penn stuff. But am I convinced that Gareth Penn or Michael Ohare really are the Zodiac killer? Either one of those guys? Not quite. Not quite. And I think we'll leave it at that. If you have anything to say, I would love to hear from you. Please drop a comment below.